The silk dress hung against my bedroom door like a ghost of tomorrow's promises. Ivory satin caught the late afternoon light streaming through my apartment windows, and I found myself staring at it for the 100th time today, my heart doing that peculiar dance between pure joy and inexplicable dread. Tomorrow, I whispered to the empty room, my fingers unconsciously twisting the engagement ring David had placed on my finger 8 months ago. The diamond caught the light, sending tiny rainbows across the wall, the same wall where we'd hung our first photograph together, laughing at some joke I couldn't even remember. Now my phone buzzed against the nightstand. David's name flashed across the screen, and warmth spread through my chest the way it always did when I saw it. Can't wait to marry you tomorrow, beautiful. Love you more than words. I typed back quickly, my smile genuine despite the knot that had been sitting in my stomach for the past week. Love you too. See you at the altar. The apartment felt too quiet after I set the phone down. Sarah, my maid of honor, had left an hour ago after helping me with last-minute preparations, and now I was alone with my thoughts, never a good combination. When anxiety was already creeping up my spine like cold fingers, I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine, hoping it would calm the restlessness that seemed to live in my bones lately. Through the window, I could see couples walking hand in hand down the street below, and I wondered if any of them felt this strange mixture of excitement and fear before their own weddings. David and I had been together for 3 years. 3 years of Sunday morning pancakes, late-night conversations about everything and nothing, and the kind of comfortable intimacy that made me believe in forever. He was steady where I was impulsive, calm where I was anxious, practical where I was a dreamer. We balanced each other. Everyone said so. So why did I feel like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into something I couldn't quite see? The wine tasted bitter on my tongue as I scrolled through our wedding photos from the rehearsal dinner last night. David looked handsome in his navy suit, his arm wrapped around my waist, his smile bright and perfect for the camera. But when I looked closer, there was something in his eyes that I couldn't quite place. A distance, maybe. Or was I just projecting my own nerves onto him? Stop it, Emma, I said aloud, my voice echoing in the kitchen. You're marrying the man you love tomorrow. This is supposed to be the happiest day of your life. But as I stared at the photos, that nagging feeling only grew stronger. In every picture, David's smile seemed just a fraction too bright, his laugh just a beat too loud. And in the background of one photo, I caught him checking his phone with an expression I'd never seen before, furtive. Almost guilty, I zoomed in on the image until his face filled my screen. His brow was furrowed, his mouth pressed into a thin line as he read whatever message had appeared. I tried to remember that moment from last night, but everything had been such a blur of congratulations and champagne toasts. Setting the phone aside, I moved to the couch and pulled a throw pillow into my lap, hugging it against my chest. Tomorrow, I would walk down the aisle of St. Mary's Cathedral, past 200 of our friends and family members, toward the man who had promised to love me for the rest of our lives. Tomorrow, I would become Emma Patterson instead of Emma Clark. Tomorrow, everything would change. The thought should have filled me with nothing but joy. Instead, it left me feeling hollow, like something important was missing and I couldn't figure out what it was. My laptop sat open on the coffee table, displaying the playlist David and I had created together for our first dance. At Last, by Etta James, his choice. He said it reminded him of the moment he knew he wanted to marry me. During that weekend in Napa when we'd gotten caught in the rain and spent the afternoon dancing in our hotel room to old jazz standards. I clicked play, letting Etta's voice fill the silence, and tried to remember that version of us. Happy, carefree, so certain about our future. But even that memory felt clouded now, tainted by something I couldn't name. The music was interrupted by the buzz of my phone. David again, just finished dinner with the guys. Heading home to get some sleep before the big day. Dream of me, ... I stared at the message for a long moment. Dinner with the guys had ended early. It was only 8:30. Usually, bachelor party activities went much later, especially the night before a wedding. But maybe David was just being responsible, making sure he got enough rest. Sweet dreams. I love you. His response came immediately. Love you too. No endearment this time. No. Beautiful or sweetheart. The pet names he used so naturally, they'd become like punctuation in our conversations. Just love you too, efficient and distant. I was reading too much into a text message. I had to be, but as I got ready for bed, brushing my teeth and washing my face with the mechanical precision of someone trying not to think, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between us. Not just today, but gradually over the past few weeks. Small changes I dismissed as pre-wedding stress, the way he'd pull away when I tried to cuddle during movies, how he'd grown quieter during our daily phone calls, the distracted look in his eyes when he thought I wasn't watching. I slipped into my pajamas, the silk ones Sarah had given me as part of my bridal gift. For the night before, she'd said with a wink, and climbed into bed. The sheets smelled like the lavender detergent I used specifically because David said it reminded him of his grandmother's garden. Even my laundry choices had become about him, about us, about the life we were building together. Tomorrow night, I wouldn't be sleeping alone in this bed. Tomorrow night, I'd be Mrs. David Patterson, starting our honeymoon in Hawaii, beginning the rest of our lives. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, as I turned off the light and stared at the ceiling in the darkness, all I could think about was that look in his eyes in the photo, the one I couldn't quite place but that made my stomach twist with an uneasiness I didn't want to name. Outside my window, the city hummed with its usual nighttime energy, and somewhere out there, David was falling asleep in his own bed, probably not plagued by the same doubts that were keeping me awake. Probably not questioning every small moment from the past month, looking for signs that something was wrong. Probably not wondering if the person you're about to marry is somehow becoming a stranger, even as you're planning to spend forever with them. I closed my eyes and tried to push the thoughts away, but sleep felt impossible. Tomorrow would answer all my questions. Tomorrow, I would see David waiting for me at the altar, and all these fears would melt away like morning mist at least. That's what I told myself as I finally drifted off, my dreams filled with ivory silk, and the sound of Etta James singing about love finally arriving. The morning of my wedding day began with rain. I woke to the soft patter against my bedroom window and the immediate, irrational thought that it was an omen. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I could hear my grandmother's voice, "Rain on your wedding day means tears in your marriage." She'd said it at my cousin's outdoor ceremony 5 years ago, right before the bride had a complete breakdown over the weather. But David had always said rain was good luck. It means the heavens are crying tears of joy, he told me when we first started talking about wedding venues. The memory made me smile despite my nerves. My phone showed 6 missed calls from Sarah, along with a string of increasingly frantic text messages. Emma, are you awake? The flowers are here. Your mom is asking about the seating arrangements. Again, WA, are you? I called her back, still lying in bed, watching the raindrops race down the glass. Thank God, Sarah's voice came through breathless. I thought you'd run away or something. Are you okay? You sound weird. I'm fine, I lied, sitting up and running a hand through my hair. Just tired. What time is it? Almost 9. The hair and makeup people will be here in an hour, and we still need to. Emma, are you sure you're okay? You really do sound strange. I forced brightness into my voice. Just wedding day nerves. Isn't that normal? Normal, yes. But you sound like someone just died. Sarah paused. Did you talk to David last night after I left? Yeah, I just texted. He went to bed early. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, trying to shake off the lingering unease from yesterday evening. Sarah, do you think David's been acting different lately? Different how? I struggled to put my feelings into words. I don't know. Distant, maybe? Like his mind is somewhere else? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Emma, honey, you're getting married in 6 hours. Of course you're both acting different. This is huge. Life-changing huge. She was right, of course. I was overthinking everything, letting pre-wedding jitters turn normal behavior into something sinister. You're right. I'm being ridiculous. You're being human. Now get your ass out of bed and come downstairs. Your mom brought coffee in those. Pastries from that place you love, and if you don't hurry, I'm eating your croissant. An hour later, my apartment had been transformed into a buzzing hive of bridal preparation. The rain had stopped, leaving everything outside looking fresh and clean, and sunlight was starting to peek through the clouds. Maybe grandmother's superstitions were wrong after all. Mom fluttered around with her usual nervous energy, adjusting flowers and fussing over details that were already perfect. The photographer wants to start with some getting ready shots, she said, smoothing my hair back from my face. You look beautiful, sweetheart. Tired, but beautiful. Thanks, Mom. That's exactly what every bride wants to hear. She laughed and kissed my cheek. You know what I mean. You're glowing. But as I sat in the chair while Marcus, my hairstylist, worked his magic with hot tools and enough hairspray to shellac a yacht, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Not something physical. The dress fit perfectly. The flowers were gorgeous. Every detail we planned for months was falling into place exactly as we'd envisioned. No. What was missing was the joy I'd always imagined I'd feel on my wedding morning. Instead, there was this strange sense of going through the motions, like I was watching someone else's life unfold while I stood on the sidelines. So, said Jenna, the makeup artist, as she dusted powder across my cheekbones, tell me about your fiancé. How did you two meet? It was a question I'd answered hundreds of times over the past year, but today the words felt rehearsed, automatic. College friends introduced us at a party. He spilled wine on my dress, and I made him buy me dinner to make up for it. And you knew right away he was the one? I paused, mascara wand halfway to my eye. Did I know right away? I remembered thinking David was attractive, charming, easy to talk to, but the one? That certainty had come later, gradually, built on shared experiences and comfortable routines rather than any lightning bolt moment. It was more of a slow burn, I said finally. We became friends first. Those are the best kind of relationships, Jenna smiled. Built on solid foundation. Solid foundation. Yes, that's exactly what David and I had. So why did I feel like the ground was shifting beneath my feet? My phone buzzed with a text from David. How is the most beautiful bride in the world feeling? This morning, I typed back, nervous but excited. You can't wait to see you walking down that aisle. You're going to take my breath away. The response was sweet, romantic, everything a bride should want to hear from her groom. But there was something about it that felt ... scripted. Like he was saying what he thought he should say rather than what he actually felt. Brides receiving love messages, Sarah said, reading over my shoulder. That's a good sign. Yeah, I agreed, but I set the phone face down on the vanity table. As the morning progressed, more people arrived. My college roommate Lisa flew in. From Portland, my Aunt Carol came up from San Diego, and suddenly the apartment was full of women who loved me, all chattering excitedly about the day ahead. I should have felt surrounded by love and support. Instead, I felt increasingly isolated, like I was trapped behind glass watching everyone else experience the joy I couldn't quite access. Emma, your phone keeps buzzing, Sarah called from across the room where she was steaming her bridesmaid dress. I glanced over to see David's name flashing on the screen again. Strange, we'd agreed not to talk much today, wanting to save the emotion for when we saw each other at the church. I answered quickly. Hey, you're not supposed to call. Emma? His voice was tight, strained in a way I'd never heard before. I need to ask you something. Everyone in the room was chattering and laughing, but something in David's tone made me press the phone closer to my ear. What is it? You sound upset. I'm not upset. I just ... He paused and I could hear voices in the background. Did you go through my phone last night? The question hit me like cold water. What? No. David, why would you ask me that? Someone went through my messages. Things were moved around. opened that shouldn't have been opened. His voice was getting sharper with each word. If it wasn't you, then who? David, I have no idea what you're talking about. I went to bed right after we texted. My heart was starting to pound. What messages? What's going on? Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. Nothing, never mind. I'm probably just being paranoid. Wedding day nerves, right? But the damage was already done. The accusation hung between us like a poisonous cloud, and I found myself gripping the phone so hard my knuckles are white. David, if something's wrong, nothing's wrong. I love you, Emma. I'll see you in a few hours. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone with my heart racing and my mind spinning. Around me, the happy chatter continued, but I felt like I was underwater, everything muffled and strange. Who was that? Mom asked, appearing at my elbow with a concerned expression. David? I managed. He just wanted to say he loves me. The lie came easily, but it tasted bitter on my tongue. Whatever that conversation had actually been about, it wasn't love. It was accusation, suspicion, and something darker underneath that I didn't want to examine too closely. Sarah caught my eye in the mirror, her expression sharp with concern. She knew me too well to buy the cheerful mask I was trying to maintain. Everything okay? She mouthed. I nodded, but my reflection betrayed me. My eyes were too bright, my smile too forced. Even through Jenna's expert makeup, I looked like a woman. On the verge of panic. What messages could David have been talking about? And why did he immediately assume I'd gone through his phone? In 3 years together, I'd never once invaded his privacy like that. The fact that his first instinct was to blame me said something about our relationship that I wasn't sure I wanted to understand. As Marcus put the finishing touches on my hair, and Jenna applied the last coat of lipstick, I tried to push David's. Strange call out of my mind. But like a splinter under the skin, it worked its way deeper with each passing minute. Who else would have access to his phone? And what kind of messages would make him so panicked that someone might have seen them? The questions multiplied like a virus, and by the time I was ready to put on my dress, the excitement I'd been hoping to feel all morning had been completely replaced by a cold, creeping dread that seemed to settle in my bones and refused to leave. In less than 3 hours, I would be walking down the aisle toward David, promising to love and trust him for the rest of my life. But for the first time since he proposed, I found myself wondering if I really knew the man I was about to marry at all. The cathedral was more beautiful than I'd ever imagined. 200 white roses lined the aisle, their fragrance mingling with the scent of beeswax candles flickering in tall brass holders. Afternoon sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the stone floor where I would soon walk toward my future husband. But as I stood in the bridal suite, watching Sarah make last-minute adjustments to my veil, all I could think about was David's strange phone call from this morning. The accusation in his voice kept replaying in my head like a broken record. Emma, you need to breathe. Sarah's hands were steady on my shoulders, her voice calm, but concerned. You look like you're about to faint. I'm fine. The words came out shakier than I intended. Through the small window, I could see guests filing into the cathedral, smiling and chatting as they found their seats. My wedding was happening. This was real. No, you're not fine. You've been pale and jumpy since that phone call this morning. Sarah moved to face me, her bridesmaid dress a soft blush pink that complemented her dark hair. What did David really say to you? Before I could answer, Mom bustled in with a flurry of nervous energy. 5 minutes, sweetheart. The photographer wants a few more shots. And then she stopped abruptly, studying my face. Emma, what's wrong? You look terrified. Pre-wedding jitters, Sarah said quickly, shooting me a look that promised we weren't done with this conversation. Well, of course you're nervous. That's perfectly normal. Mom smoothed an invisible wrinkle from my dress, her own anxiety barely contained beneath her bright smile. Your father is waiting outside to walk you down. He's so proud, Emma, we both are. The weight of their expectations settled on my shoulders like lead. Everyone was so happy, so excited for this moment. How could I voice the doubts that were eating me alive without ruining everything for everyone? A soft knock interrupted my spiraling thoughts. "Come in," Mom called. Lisa peeked her head around the door, her face glowing with excitement. "It's time, and Emma, you look absolutely stunning. David is going to cry when he sees you." David, in a few minutes, I would see him waiting at the altar, handsome in his tuxedo, smiling that perfect smile that had charmed me from the very beginning. Maybe when I saw him, all these fears would evaporate. Maybe this cold dread in my stomach was just normal bride nerves blown out of proportion. "Ready?" Dad appeared in the doorway, looking distinguished in his navy suit. His eyes misted slightly when he saw me. "You look just like your mother did on our wedding day." I linked, my arm through his, drawing strength from his steady presence. Dad had never steered me wrong. If he thought David was right for me, then maybe I was just overthinking everything. The bridal march began, and I heard the congregation rustle to their feet. This was it. No more doubts, no more second-guessing. I was about to marry the man I loved, but as we stepped into the main cathedral, something felt wrong. David stood at the altar, just as I'd imagined, handsome and smiling. But there was something off about his posture, a tension in his shoulders that I could see even from the back of the church. And beside him, his best man, Marcus, was whispering something urgently in his ear. David's head snapped up as the music began, his eyes finding mine across the distance. But instead of the joy and love I'd expected to see, there was something else in his expression. Panic? Fear? My steps faltered slightly, and Dad squeezed my arm. "You okay, sweetheart?" I nodded, forcing myself to keep walking. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe the strange morning had made me paranoid, seeing problems where none existed. But as I got closer to the altar, I could see David's face more clearly. His smile was perfect, practiced, but it didn't reach his eyes. And there was a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead, despite the cool cathedral air. When I reached the front of the church, Dad lifted my veil and kissed my cheek. "Be happy, Emma," he whispered, then placed my hand in David's. David's palm was damp with perspiration, his fingers cold despite the warmth of the day. When I looked up into his eyes, searching for the connection that had always been there between us, I found something that made my heart sink. Distance. Like he was looking at me from across an impossible gulf. "You look beautiful," he murmured. But the words sounded automatic. Rehearsed. Father Martinez began the ceremony, his voice warm and familiar as he welcomed everyone to witness our union. I'd known him since childhood, and having him perform our wedding had felt like the perfect touch. But now, as he spoke about love and commitment and the sanctity of marriage, I felt like a fraud standing in my white dress, promising forever, to a man who suddenly felt like a stranger. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today, ... The familiar words washed over me, but I wasn't really listening. All my attention was focused on David, on the subtle signs that something was very, very wrong. The way his jaw was clenched, the rapid pulse I could see beating in his temple, the fact that he hadn't really looked at me since I'd reached the altar. Behind him, I noticed Marcus glancing repeatedly at his phone, which seemed odd during a wedding ceremony. At one point, he leaned forward and whispered something to David, again causing David's shoulders to tense even more. "Do you, David Patterson, take Emma Clark to be your lawfully wedded wife?" This was the moment I'd dreamed about for months. David was supposed to look into my eyes, his voice strong and certain as he promised to love me forever. Instead, he seemed to be having some kind of internal struggle, his eyes starting to Marcus, to the congregation, anywhere but my face. "I do?" he said finally, but there was no conviction in it. No joy. It sounded more like a confession than a vow. Father Martinez turned to me. "Do you, Emma Clark, take David Patterson to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, in good times and bad, for as long as you both shall live?" The cathedral fell silent. 200 people waited for my response. My parents beamed at me from the front row. Sarah gave me an encouraging nod from where she stood behind me, but all I could think about was David's strange phone call, his accusation about someone going through his messages, the fear in his eyes that he was trying so hard to hide. What messages was he so desperate to keep secret? And why did I suddenly feel like I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life? The word came out as barely a whisper. Father Martinez waited patiently, his kind eyes encouraging. The silence stretched longer, and I could hear people beginning to murmur in the pews behind me. I looked at David, really looked at him, searching for some sign that this was right, that we belonged together, that the man I'd fallen in love with was still there beneath this anxious stranger. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. Relief. For just a moment, David's careful mask slipped, and I saw relief flash across his features. Like he was hoping I would say no. Like he wanted me to be the one to stop this wedding, because he didn't have the courage to do it himself. The realization hit me like a physical blow. David didn't want to marry me. Whatever was in those mysterious messages, whatever secret he was protecting, had made him realize he couldn't go through with this. But instead of being honest with me, he was going to let me humiliate myself in front of everyone we loved. My hands started to shake, and I had to grip my bouquet tighter to keep from dropping it. Emma? Father Martinez prompted gently. I opened my mouth to speak, but before any words could come out, the cathedral's heavy wooden doors burst open with a bang that echoed through the sacred space like a gunshot. Every head turned toward the back of the church. A woman stood silhouetted in the doorway, her hair wild from the wind, her dress wrinkled like she'd traveled a long distance in a hurry. But it was her voice that made my world tilt off its axis. "Stop!" she cried, her words carrying across the stunned silence. "You can't marry her, David, not when you're already married to me." The bouquet slipped from my nerveless fingers, white roses scattering across the stone floor like fallen snow. Behind me, I heard Sarah gasp, heard Mom's sharp intake of breath, heard the congregation erupt into shocked murmurs. But all I could do was stare at David's face as the color drained from it completely, his eyes wide with the panic of a man whose darkest secret had just been exposed in the worst possible way. The woman started walking down the aisle toward us, and with each step she took, I felt my carefully constructed life crumbling around me like a house of cards in a hurricane. "David," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the chaos erupting behind us. "Is it true?" He looked at me, then really looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the answer to every question I'd been afraid to ask. The reason for his distance, his strange behavior, his panic about someone going through his phone. "Emma, I can explain," but there was no explanation that could fix this. No words that could undo what had just been revealed in front of everyone I loved. I was standing at the altar in my wedding dress, about to marry a man who already had a wife, and the worst part was, some deep part of me wasn't even surprised. The woman walking down the aisle had David's eyes. Not the color hers were brown where his were blue, but the shape, the way they crinkled slightly at the corners. Even in my shock, that detail registered with crystalline clarity. She was beautiful. In a careless way, with long dark hair and olive skin, wearing a simple sundress that suggested left wherever she came from in a hurry. "David," she said again, and her voice carried an accent I couldn't quite place. "We need to talk." The cathedral had erupted into chaos. People were standing, craning their necks to get a better view, voices rising in confusion and speculation. I heard someone's phone camera click, then another, and realized with a distant sort of horror that this moment would be documented, shared, remembered forever, but I couldn't move. Couldn't think, could barely breathe. "Emma," David's hand touched my arm, and I flinched away like he'd burned me. "Please, let me explain." "Explain?" The word came out strangled. "Explain what, exactly? That you're already married? That our entire relationship has been a lie?" Father Martinez stepped forward, his face grave. "Perhaps we should move this discussion to the vestry." "No." The woman David's wife, my mind supplied with brutal efficiency. had reached the front of the church. She was younger than me, maybe 25, with the kind of effortless beauty that came from good genes rather than effort. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't let this happen. Not when I just found out about it. How did you find out? David's voice was barely above a whisper, but in the sudden hush that had fallen over the congregation, everyone could hear him. She reached into her purse and pulled out a phone. You left your other phone at the apartment in Barcelona? The one he thought I didn't know about. She held it up, and I could see messages on the screen, though I was too far away to read them. Imagine my surprise when I saw all these texts about wedding plans. The world tilted sideways. Another phone. An apartment in Barcelona? How many lies were there? David, I said, and my voice sounded strange and far away, like it was coming from someone else. How long have you been married to her? He looked like he was going to be sick. Emma, please, how long? I repeated, each word sharp as broken glass. 2 years, he whispered. 2 years. Our entire relationship, I love you. Every plan we made, every night he'd spent in my bed, all of it while he had a wife somewhere else. What's her name? I asked, though I wasn't sure why it mattered. Sophia, the woman answered for herself. And you must. Bienna, I've heard so much about you. Her smile was bitter. Though David told me you were just a friend from work. A friend from work. 3 years reduced to that casual lie. Behind me, I could hear Sarah talking to someone, probably trying to figure out what to do, how to handle this situation. I could hear my mother crying, my father's low, angry voice. But it all felt distant. Unreal, like I was watching it happen to someone else. The phone calls, I said, pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. When you would leave the room to take calls. The business trips to Europe that seemed to happen so often. The way you'd get tense when your phone buzzed. David nodded. Miserably, I never meant for it to go this far. I was going to tell you when. The question exploded out of me. When exactly were you planning to mention that you already have a wife? Before or after we said our vows? I was trying to figure out how. There is no how, David. I was shaking now, anger finally cutting through the shock. You can't figure out how to tell someone you're already married. You just don't lie about it in the first place. Sophia moved closer, her dark eyes fixed on David with a mixture of hurt and fury that probably mirrored my own expression. When were you going to tell me about Emma? Or were you planning to just live 2 separate lives forever? The silence that followed was deafening. 200 people waited for David's answer, but he just stood there, his face gray, looking like a man whose world was collapsing, which I supposed it was. I need to sit down, I said suddenly. My legs felt unsteady, and the weight of my dress seemed to be pulling me toward the ground. Emma? David reached for me again, but I stepped back. Don't touch me. Don't say my name. My voice broke, and I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying to hold back the sob that was building in my chest. Father Martinez appeared at my elbow. There's a chair in the vestry, dear. Would you No. I straightened my spine, drawing on some reserve of strength I didn't know I possessed. I need to go home. Emma, please, David said desperately. We can work this out. We can figure this out together. I stared at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. How had I never noticed how easily lies came to him? How'd I miss the calculation behind his smile? Work it out, I repeated. David, you're married to someone else. There is no working this out. There is no us. There never was. I turned toward the congregation, toward all the faces staring at me with expressions ranging from pity to curiosity to horror, my parents in the front row looking devastated, my grandmother dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, colleagues from work, college friends, neighbors, all witnesses to the most humiliating moment of my life. I'm sorry, I said, though my voice barely carried beyond the first few rows. I'm so sorry for wasting everyone's time. Then I turned and walked back down the aisle, my heels clicking against stone, my dress rustling with each step. Behind me, I could hear voices rising again, could hear Sarah calling my name, could hear Sophia saying something sharp to David in what might have been Spanish, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. If I stopped moving, I was afraid I might collapse completely. The cathedral doors seemed impossibly far away, but eventually I reached them, pushed through them, and found myself standing on the steps in the late afternoon sunlight. Cars lined the street, all the guests who had come to celebrate what they thought was the happiest day of my life. My phone was buzzing in the small clutch Sarah had insisted I carry, but I ignored it. Everything felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream or maybe a nightmare. A taxi was dropping off a late-arriving guest, and I stepped toward it before it could pull away. "Miss?" the driver asked, looking concerned. "You okay?" "You're supposed to be getting married, not leaving." "Change of plans," I said, climbing into the back seat. "Can you take me to Riverside Drive? The apartment building with the green awning?" As the taxi pulled away from the cathedral, I caught a glimpse of people streaming out of the doors. Sarah was there, still in her pink dress, scanning the crowd. Frantically, my mother was crying in my father's arms. And somewhere inside, David was probably trying to explain the unexplainable to his wife, his real wife. While the ruins of our wedding lay scattered like debris around them, I closed my eyes and leaned back against the seat, finally allowing myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. In the space of 5 minutes, my entire life had been revealed as an elaborate lie. The man I planned to spend forever with was a stranger who already belonged to someone else. The taxi driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, probably wondering if the crying bride in his backseat was having some kind of breakdown. He wasn't wrong. "You want to talk about it?" he asked as we stopped at a red light. His voice was kind with the practiced gentleness of someone who'd probably seen everything in his years of driving. "My fiancé is already married," I said. The words feeling foreign on my tongue. "I found out at the altar." He winced. "Damn, that's rough, lady. Real rough." The simple acknowledgement of how awful this was made something break loose in my chest. The tears I'd been holding back finally came, hot and fast, streaming down my cheeks and probably ruining Jenna's carefully applied makeup dot when we reached my building. I fumbled in my clutch for my wallet, but the driver waved me away. "On the house," he said. "You got enough to deal with today." I made it up to my apartment on autopilot, muscle memory guiding me past Mrs. Chun from 3B, who was checking her mail and did a double take at the sight of me in my wedding dress at 4N. The afternoon. I could only imagine what I looked like, mascara streaked down my cheeks, my carefully styled hair starting to fall apart. My ivory silk dress wrinkled from sitting in the taxi. Inside my apartment, everything looked exactly the same as it had this morning when I'd left, full of nervous excitement. The breakfast dishes Sarah and I had used were still in the sink. My regular clothes were scattered across the bed where I tossed them while deciding what to wear underneath my wedding dress. But everything felt different now, foreign, like I was seeing someone else's life. I kicked off my heels and walked to the bathroom, catching sight of myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, her lipstick smudged, and her veil hanging crooked. I looked like a ghost of a bride. A cautionary tale dot my phone had been buzzing constantly since I left the cathedral. Calls from Sarah, from Mom, from numbers I didn't recognize, probably reporters or gossips who'd already heard about the drama at St. Mary's. I turned it off and set it on the bathroom counter. The silence that followed was deafening. I started pulling pins from my hair, letting the carefully constructed updo fall apart piece by piece. Each bobby pin that hit the marble countertop sounded like a tiny bell tolling for the death of the life I thought I was going to have. How long had David been planning this? Had he ever intended to go through with the wedding, or had he been hoping something would happen to stop it? Maybe that's why he'd seemed so strange lately, so distant. Maybe he'd been trying to work up the courage to tell me the truth, or maybe he'd been praying I'd somehow find out on my own so he wouldn't have to be the one to destroy everything. The worst part was how it all made sense now. The pieces I'd been trying to force together for weeks suddenly fit with horrible clarity. His reluctance to set a wedding date initially. The way he'd never wanted to talk about our future beyond vague platitudes. How he'd always deflected when I brought up having children or buying a house together. I thought he was just cautious, methodical. Really, he was just trying to figure out how to manage two separate lives. A sharp knock on my door made me freeze. For a moment, I considered not answering, just hiding in my bathroom until whoever it was went away. But the knocking came again, more insistent this time. Emma?
It's Sarah. I know you're in there.
I should have known she'd come after me. Sarah had been my best friend since college, and she had a key to my apartment for emergencies. This probably qualified. I wrapped a bathrobe over my wedding dress and opened the door. Sarah stood in the hallway still wearing her bridesmaid dress, her makeup streaked with tears, holding a bottle of wine and a box of tissues. "Oh, honey," she said, taking one look at my face. "Let me in." I stepped aside and she immediately pulled me into a hug that made me start crying again. We stood there in my entryway for several minutes, me sobbing into her shoulder while she rubbed my back and made soothing noises. "What happened after I left?" I finally asked, pulling away and wiping my eyes with the sleeve of my robe. "Chaos," Sarah said grimly. "Sophia, that's her name, right?" Started yelling at David in what I think was Spanish. "Your dad looked like he wanted to punch him. Your mom was crying so hard I thought she might hyperventilate. And David just stood there like a deer in headlights. Where is he now?" "I have no idea." He and Sophia left together, still arguing. The guests started filtering out pretty quickly after that. "Your parents wanted to come here, but I told them to give you some space first." Sarah guided me to the couch and opened the wine while I curled up in the corner, pulling my knees too. My chest. The wedding dress ballooned around me like a white cloud, a mockery of everything it was supposed to represent. "I should have known," I said, accepting the glass she handed me. All those signs I ignored. The way he'd get secretive. About his phone, the unexplained trips, how he never wanted to talk about the future in concrete terms. "Emma, don't do this to yourself. There's no way you could have known he was living a double life. That's not a normal thing people do." But it felt like there should have been some instinct, some inner voice that warned me I was falling in love. With an illusion? How had I been so wrong about someone I'd shared a bed with for 3 years? "Do you think?" I started, then stopped, not sure I wanted to hear the answer to my question. "What? Do you think he ever loved me? Or was it all just ... I don't know, convenient? A way to have 2 different lives?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, swirling wine in her glass. "I think David is a coward who convinced himself he could have it all without considering the people he was hurting. But Emma, the way he looked at you sometimes, I think part of him did love you. That doesn't excuse what he did, not even close, but you weren't wrong about everything." The thought was almost worse than believing it had all been fake. If David had loved me even a little, then what we'd had might have been real in some twisted way, which made his betrayal hurt even more. "I need to get out of this dress," I said suddenly. The silk felt suffocating now, like it was binding me to a life that no longer existed. In my bedroom, Sarah helped me out of the elaborate gown, carefully hanging in the closet like we were putting away a costume after a play had ended. I pulled on yoga pants and an old college sweatshirt, clothes that felt like armor against the outside world. When I came back to the living room, Sarah was standing at the window looking down at the street. "There's a news van out there," she said quietly. My stomach dropped. "Already?" Someone must have posted about it on social media. You know how these things spread. The thought of strangers dissecting my humiliation online made me feel sick. By tomorrow, the story of the bride whose fiancé was already married would probably be viral, turned into memes and cautionary tales and entertainment for people who didn't know me or David or Sophia. I need to get out of town, I said suddenly. I can't stay here and deal with this circus.
Where will you go?
I thought about my sister in Portland, my college friend in Denver, the various relatives who would welcome me with open arms and endless questions I wasn't ready to answer. I don't know yet. Somewhere far away from here, Sarah nodded. Do you want me to help you pack? As I looked around our apartment, really, since David had been spending most nights here for the past year, I realized how much of my life was tangled up with his. His books on the shelves, his clothes in the closet, his coffee. Mugs still sitting in the sink from yesterday morning when he kissed me goodbye and told me he'd see me at the altar. Everything would have to be sorted through, divided up, returned. 3 years of a relationship that had never really existed would have to be dismantled piece by piece. But first, I had to figure out how to put myself back together. The wine was making me feel slightly more human, but it couldn't touch the hollow ache in my chest where my future used to be. This morning I'd been Emma Clark, bred to be a woman with a clear path forward. Tonight I was just Emma Clark, a woman whose life had imploded in front of 200 witnesses. Sarah, I said quietly, what am I going to do?
She sat down
beside me and took my hand. You're going to survive this. You're going to figure out who you are when you're not half of a couple built on lies. And you're going to be okay. Promise? Promise. But as we sat there in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the remnants of my shattered wedding day, I wondered if that was a promise anyone could really keep. Some betrayals cut so deep they changed the fundamental shape of who you were. I had a terrible feeling that by the time I figured out how to put myself back together, I might not recognize the person I'd become outside. The news van's bright lights illuminated my street like a stage set, waiting for the next act of this tragedy to begin. 3 days passed in a haze of untouched meals and sleepless nights before I finally worked up the courage to call David. I'd spent those days in my apartment like a fugitive, ordering groceries online and ignoring the persistent knocking of reporters who'd somehow gotten my address. Sarah had been my lifeline, bringing coffee and sitting with me in comfortable silence while I tried to process the magnitude of David's betrayal, but avoidance could only last so long. There were questions that needed answers, belongings that needed to be returned, and a life that needed to be untangled no matter how much it hurt that my hands shook as I dialed his number, and I almost hung up when I heard his familiar voice. Emma. He sounded exhausted, defeated. I wasn't sure you'd ever call. We need to talk, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. In person. Of course. Yes. Whatever you need. He paused and I could hear traffic in the background. Where do you want to meet? Not my apartment that felt too intimate, too much like the life we'd shared. Not his place either, wherever that actually was now. Riverside Park, the bench by the old oak tree where we used to feed the ducks. The irony wasn't lost on me. Choosing the spot where he'd first told me he loved me to have the conversation that would finally end us. I'll be there in an hour, he said quietly. David? I stopped him before he could hang up. Come alone. The walk to the park felt like a funeral march. I'd chosen jeans and a sweater, armor casual clothes that wouldn't remind either of us of the bride I'd been just days ago. But I still felt exposed, like everyone on the street could see the word fool written across my forehead. David was already waiting when I arrived, sitting on our bench with his shoulders hunched and his hands clasped between his knees. He looked like he'd aged years in 3 days stubble covering his jaw, dark circles under his eyes, his usually perfect hair disheveled. When he saw me approaching, he stood up so quickly he nearly knocked over the coffee he'd brought. Emma, thank you for... Sit down, I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. Just sit down. We sat at opposite ends of the bench, the space between us feeling like an ocean. For a moment, neither of us spoke. A jogger passed by, her ponytail, swinging, her breathing rhythmic and easy. Normal life continuing while mine lay in pieces. How long were you planning to keep this up? I asked finally. David stared at his hands. I don't know. I kept thinking I'd figure out a way to make It work. Make it work. The words exploded out of me. David, you can't be married to two people. There's no making that work. I know that now. His voice was barely a whisper. But when it started, I thought, what started? The lies? The double life? When exactly did you decide I didn't? Deserve the truth? He flinched like I'd slapped him. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Sophia and we got married in Barcelona when I was there for that consulting project 2 years ago. It was supposed to be temporary, just so she could get her visa to stay in the country legally. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. A marriage of convenience? Her student visa was expiring, and she would have been deported. Back to Colombia, her family there, it's complicated. Dangerous. She needed help, and I thought I could provide it without it affecting anything else. Without it affecting us, you mean? Yes. He looked up at me then, and I saw genuine anguish in his eyes. Emma, I never meant for it to become real with her. It was just paperwork, just helping someone who needed help, but it did become real. The pieces were starting to fit together, creating a picture I didn't want to see. You fell in love with her. David was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I tried not to. God, Emma, I tried so hard not to, but being with her is like ... Like what? I demanded, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Like coming alive, he whispered. Like discovering a part of myself I didn't know existed. The words hit me like physical blows. In 3 years together, David had never spoken about me with that kind of passion. We'd been comfortable, compatible, safe, but we'd never been the kind of love that made someone feel like they were coming alive. So why didn't you just end things with me? I asked, my voice hollow. Why keep stringing me along? Because I love you too. He turned to face me fully, his eyes pleading. Emma, what we have is real. It's different from what I have with Sophia, but it's real. Had, I corrected. What we had, and no, David, it wasn't real. Real relationships are built on honesty. What we had was built on lies. That's not true, isn't it? I stood up, pacing away from the bench because I couldn't sit still anymore. How many times did you lie to me, David? How many business trips were actually visits to your wife? How many times did you come to my bed after being in hers? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? I spun to face him. Explain it to me, because I'm trying to understand how the man I thought I knew could live such an elaborate lie for 2 years. David stood too, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I've once found endearing. I was trying to do the right thing for everyone. Sophia needed help. You and I were happy. I thought I could manage both situations until what? Until you figured out which one of us you wanted to keep. No. Emma, it was never about choosing. You're both important to me in different ways. The casual way he said it, like loving 2 women simultaneously, was a reasonable life choice, made something snap inside me. I am not someone's backup plan. I shouted, not caring that other park visitors were starting to stare. I'm not half of some twisted arrangement where you get to have everything you want while lying to everyone involved. Please, keep your voice down. Don't you dare tell me to keep my voice down. You humiliated me in front of everyone I care about. You let me plan a wedding, pick out a dress, write vows, all while you knew it could never happen because you're already married to someone else. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I was too angry to care. Do you have any idea what you've done to me? Any idea at all? Emma, please, I trusted you completely. I changed my whole life around our future together. I turned down job offers in other cities because I wanted to build something with you. I defended you to friends who said you seemed distant or secretive. I made excuses for you when you disappear for days at a time. David sank back down onto the bench, his head in his hands. I know I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. You don't get to make this about your guilt, I said, my voice deadly quiet now. You don't get to be the tortured soul who made a mistake. You made a choice, David. Over and over again, for 2 years, you chose to lie to me.
What do you want? Me to say?
He asked, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. That I'm sorry? That I wish I'd done things differently? Because I am, and I do. I want you to tell me the truth. All of it. No more lies, no more justifications. I want to know exactly who I've been sharing my bed with for the past 3 years. David was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him, struggling with something. Finally, he took a shaky breath. There's something else, he said quietly. Something I haven't told you about Sophia and me. The way he said it made my blood run cold. After everything he'd already revealed, what could
Possibly be worse? What?
I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. He looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw a fear that went deeper than guilt or shame. It was the look of a man who is about to lose everything. She's pregnant, Emma. Sophia is pregnant with my child. The world tilted sideways. I actually stumbled, catching myself against the back of the bench as his words hit me like a physical force. Pregnant. David was going to be a father. With his wife. His real wife. How far along? I heard myself ask, as if the details mattered, as if they could somehow make this betrayal more bearable. 4 months. He whispered 4 months. Which meant she'd gotten pregnant right around the time David and I had started seriously planning our wedding. While I was choosing flowers and tasting cakes, he was creating new life with another woman. I sank onto the bench, my legs unable to support me anymore. Everything I thought I knew, everything I thought I understood about our relationship, crumbled. Like sand. Emma, say something. Please. But I couldn't speak. Couldn't think. Could barely breathe. David was going to be a father, and it had nothing to do with me. The silence stretched between us like a canyon, filled only by the distant sounds of the city and my own ragged breathing. David's revelation hung in the air like smoke from a house fire, choking off everything that had come before.
4 months.
I repeated, testing the words on my tongue. They tasted like ashes. So, while we were tasting wedding cakes and addressing invitations, you were making a baby with your wife. David flinched. Emma, please try to understand. Understand what? I stood up abruptly, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. That you've been living a completely separate life? That while I was planning our future, you were creating an actual future with someone else? It wasn't planned. Sophia and I, we didn't mean for it to happen, but it did happen. The words came out flat, emotionless. I felt strangely detached from my own voice, like I was watching this conversation from somewhere outside my body. You're going to be a father, yes, and you were going to marry me anyway. David's face crumpled. I didn't know what else to do. I thought maybe I could figure out a way to be there for the baby without destroying what we have.
What we have?
I laughed, and the sound was bitter even to my own ears. David, what we have is nothing. It's built on lies and deception and your complete disregard for my right to make informed choices about my own life.
A young couple walked
past us, their hands intertwined, laughing about something private and sweet. I watched them with a mixture of envy and grief, remembering when David and I used to look like that. When I thought we were building something real together. How are you planning to handle it? I asked, genuinely curious now. The baby, I mean. Were you going to pretend you were traveling for work every time you needed to be there for doctor's appointments? What about when the baby was born? First steps, first words. Were you going to miss all of that to maintain the lie? I was going to tell you, he said desperately. Eventually. I just needed time to figure out how. There is no how, David. The detachment I'd felt moments before shattered like glass, and fury roared through me like wildfire. You can't tell the woman you're supposed to marry that you're having a baby with your secret wife. There's no gentle way to deliver that news. David stood up and reached for me, but I stepped back so quickly I nearly fell. Don't touch me, I said, my voice deadly quiet. Don't ever touch me again. Emma, please. I love you. I know this is horrible and complicated, but I do love you. You love me?" I stared at him in disbelief. "You think this is what love looks like? Lying to me every single day? Making me an unwitting accomplice to adultery? Planning to marry me while your wife carries your child? I was trying to protect you. From what? The truth. My right to make my own choices about my life? From getting hurt. I'm hurt now," I screamed, not caring who heard me.
I'm destroyed now.
"Whatever pain you thought you were protecting me from, this is worse. This is so much worse." David sank back onto the bench, his head in his hands. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered Sophia standing in the cathedral doorway, her voice carrying a cross. The stunned silence as she revealed the truth David had been too cowardly to tell me himself. "Tell me about your," I said suddenly. David looked up, confused. "What?" "Sophia, tell me about your wife. The woman who's carrying your child. Emma, I don't think I want to know. I deserve to know. What's she like?" David was quiet for so long I thought he might refuse to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft with a tenderness I'd rarely heard him use when talking about me. "She's an artist. A painter. She sees the world in ways I never could, finds beauty in things other people overlook."
He paused, lost in
"Memory. She makes me want to be braver, more spontaneous. When I'm with her, I feel like I could do anything." Each word was like a knife twisting in my chest. "And me? What did I make you feel?" "Safe," he said without hesitation. "Stable, like I had a foundation to build on." Safe, stable, foundation. Not alive, not brave, not capable of anything. I was the sensible choice, the practical option, the woman who made him feel secure rather than inspired. "I see," I said quietly. "So I was your insurance policy. The safe harbor you could return to when your grand adventure got too complicated." It's exactly what I was. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. You kept me around because I was reliable, predictable. I wouldn't make demands or ask too many questions. I was the perfect cover for your real life. David's silence confirmed what I already knew. For 3 years, I'd been a supporting character. In my own relationship, unknowingly playing the role of the other woman while thinking I was the future wife.
How long? I asked. What?
How long were you planning to keep this up? Were you going to stay married to Sophia and keep me as a mistress, or were you eventually going to choose? "I didn't have a plan," David admitted. "I kept thinking something would change, that I'd figure out a way to make it work for everyone. Make it work for everyone," I repeated. "Except that's impossible, David. You can't love 2 women, marry one, impregnate the other, and expect everyone to be happy about it." A jogger passed by us again, the same woman from earlier, making another lap around the park. Her rhythm was steady, her breathing controlled. She knew where she was going, had a clear path forward. I envied her certainty. "What happens now?" David asked quietly. I looked at him, really looked at him, and tried to find some trace of the man I'd fallen in love with. But all I saw was a stranger, someone capable of depths of deception I couldn't have imagined. "Now you go home to your wife," I said. "Your pregnant wife. And you figure out how to be a husband and father without destroying any more lives in the process. And us? There is no us. There never was, apparently." David's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked like he might cry. "Emma, please, can't we find some way to what? Continue this charade? Pretend that finding out you're married and expecting a child is something we can work through?" I shook my head. "David, you have a family now. A real family. Whatever fantasy you were living with me is over." I started walking toward the park entrance, needing to put distance between us before I said something I'd regret. Or before I completely fell apart in front of him. "Emma, wait." I turned back, and the desperation in his voice almost broke my resolve. "I do love you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Whatever else you think about me, please believe that. What we had was real, at least for me." I studied his face, looking for any sign that he understood how completely he'd shattered.
Me.
Maybe you did love me, David, in your own selfish, compartmentalized way, but love without honesty isn't love at all. It's just possession. Please don't end things like this. Please. I'm not ending anything, I said quietly. You ended it the day you decided I didn't deserve the truth. You ended it every time you lied to my face, every time you came to my bed after being with her, every time you let me plan a future that could never exist. I turned and walked away, leaving him sitting on the bench where he'd first told me he
Loved me.
The irony was perfect in a twisted sort of way. Behind me, I heard him call my name one more time, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Because despite everything he'd done, despite all the lies and betrayal, part of me still wanted to run back to him, to find some way to make this work, and that was the most terrifying truth of all. I made it 3 blocks from the park before the full weight of everything crashed over me like a tsunami. David was married. David was going to be a father. David had never really been mine at all. I ducked into the first coffee shop I saw, desperate for somewhere to sit down before my legs gave out completely. The barista, a girl with purple hair and kind eyes, took one look at my face and brought me a cup of tea without me even ordering. Bad day? She asked gently. Bad life, I managed. Wrapping my hands around the warm mug, I sat in that coffee shop for 2 hours, watching people come and go, living their normal lives, dealing with normal problems. A businessman complained loudly about a delayed flight. A mother tried to entertain her cranky toddler. College students studied for exams, their biggest worry whether they'd pass their midterms. Envied every single one of them. My phone buzzed constantly with messages I couldn't bring myself to read. Sarah checking on me. My mother wanting to know if I was okay. Numbers I didn't recognize, probably. Reporters still trying to get a statement about the wedding that never was. But it was the message from an unknown, international number that finally made me pick up the phone. This is Sophia. David's wife. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long time, my heart pounding. What could she possibly want to say to me? What was there left to discuss? Before I could talk myself out of it, I typed back, when and where. Her response came immediately. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Central Park near Bethesda Fountain. I'll be wearing a red coat. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of sleepless anxiety. I changed clothes 3 times, trying to find something that struck. The right balance between put together and casual before settling on jeans and a black sweater. I wasn't trying to impress David's wife, but I didn't want to look like the broken woman I felt like inside. Sophia was already waiting when I arrived. At the fountain, exactly as she described, red coat, dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked younger in daylight, maybe 26 or 27, with the kind of effortless beauty that came from good genes and an easy confidence. She also looked very obviously pregnant. Emma? She said as I approached, her accent softer. Then I remembered from the cathedral. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Thank you for coming.
I wasn't sure you would.
We found an empty bench overlooking the water, sitting with careful space between us like 2 wounded animals circling each other. How are you? Sophia asked, and the genuine concern in her voice almost undid me. How do you think I am? I replied, then immediately felt bad for snapping at her.
I'm sorry, that was uncalled for.
You're not the one who lied to me for 3 years. No, but I'm the reason he did. I looked at her more closely. Are you? Sophia sighed, placing a protective hand over her stomach. When David and I got married, it really was supposed to be temporary. Just paperwork to help me stay in the country legally. We barely knew each other, but that changed. Yes, her voice grew soft. It changed slowly, then all at once. David is... When he lets himself, he's capable of such passion, such intensity. But with you, he always seemed to be holding something back. The observation stung, but I couldn't deny its truth. Even in our most intimate moments, there had always been a part of David that remained carefully controlled, walled off. He told me about the baby, I said quietly. Sophia's hand moved protectively to her stomach again.
I found out right after.
We decided to make our marriage real. The timing was
Complicated.
because of me. Because David couldn't bring himself to end things with you properly. He kept saying he would, that he just needed to find the right way. But weeks turned into months.
And you let him string me along?
Sophia's eyes flashed with something. That might have been anger. Let him? Emma, I begged him to tell you the truth. I threatened to leave him, to move back to Colombia, to raise the baby alone. Do you think I wanted to be the secret wife while another woman planned her wedding?
To my husband?
Her words hit me like cold water. You knew about the wedding? I knew about everything. Every detail you planned, every dream you had about your future together. David would come home from seeing you and tell me about the flowers you'd chosen. The dress you bought, how excited you were. Her voice broke slightly. It was torture. I stared at her, trying to process this new information. If you knew, why didn't you stop it sooner? Why wait until the actual ceremony? Because I thought he would come to his senses. I thought he would find a way to tell you himself. Tears started rolling down her cheeks. But as it got closer to the wedding date, I realized he was actually going to go through with it. He was going to commit bigamy rather than hurt your
feelings. So you showed up at the cathedral.
I took the first flight I could get. I couldn't let him destroy all our lives by being a coward. We sat in silence for a moment, watching ducks paddle across the water. A father was teaching his young son to skip stones, their laughter carrying across the pond on the afternoon breeze. I'm sorry, Sophia said quietly, for how you found out, for how public it was. You didn't deserve that humiliation. No, I agreed. I didn't. David loves you, you know? In his own broken way. I laughed bitterly. Everyone keeps telling me. That, as if it makes any of this better?
It doesn't make it better.
But it makes it ... more tragic, maybe. That he was so afraid of losing either of us that he lost you both. I looked at her sharply. Both? Sophia's smile was sad. I can't stay with someone who is willing to live such an elaborate lie. Someone who would have married another woman while I carried his child. The David the First fell in love with was honest and passionate and brave. This version of him, I don't know this version.
So you're leaving him?
We're getting divorced. I'm moving back to Barcelona, where I have friends who can help me with the baby. David will have visitation rights, but
she shrugged.
I need to be with someone I can trust completely. The irony was almost funny. David had been so desperate to keep both of us that he'd ended up losing us both. What will you do? Sophia asked. I don't know yet. It was the truth. For the first time in my adult life, I had absolutely no plan, no clear path forward. Maybe travel, maybe move somewhere new.
Start over. That sounds scary. Terrifying, I agreed.
But also ... maybe liberating. I've spent so long defining myself as half of David and Emma that I'm not sure who I am on my own. Sophia nodded, understanding. I felt the same way when I first came to America. Everything was uncertain, but there was also possibility in that uncertainty. We talked for another hour, two women who had both loved the same man and been betrayed by him in different ways. It should have been awkward, but instead it felt oddly healing. Sophia was intelligent and kind, and I could see why David had fallen in love with her. In another life, under different circumstances, we might have been friends. When she finally stood to leave, she hesitated for a moment. Emma, for what it's worth, I think you're better off without him. You deserve someone who chooses you completely, not someone who keeps you as a backup plan. So do you? I replied. She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. Yes, we both do. After she left, I stayed by the fountain for a long time, watching the sun set over the park. Tomorrow, I would have to start making decisions about
my future.
I'd have to figure out what to do with the apartment, the job, the life I built around a relationship that had never really existed. But tonight, For the first time since the cathedral, I felt something other than devastating grief.
Felt angry.
And anger, I was beginning to realize, was much more useful than heartbreak. David had stolen 3 years of my life with his lies and cowardice. He'd made me an unknowing participant in adultery. He'd humiliated me in front of everyone I cared about, but he hadn't broken me. Not completely, and I was going to make sure he knew it. The letter took me 3 drafts to get right. I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by crumpled paper and empty coffee cups, trying to find the words that would say everything I needed David to understand without revealing how deeply he'd wounded me. David, I'm writing this because our conversation in the park left too many things unsaid, and I need you to understand exactly what you've taken from me. You didn't just break my heart, though you did that thoroughly enough. You stole my ability to trust my own judgment. You made me question every instinct I had. Every moment of doubt I dismissed because I believed in us. You turned me into someone who was willing to ignore red flags because I thought love meant giving someone the benefit of the doubt. For 3 years, I made decisions based on a future that only existed in my imagination. I turned down job opportunities, changed my life plans, and built my entire sense of self around being half of David and Emma. I defended you to friends who were concerned about your behavior. I made excuses for your distance, your secretiveness, your sudden trips. I was so busy being the understanding girlfriend that I forgot to be a woman who demanded honesty from the person she loved, but I won't make that mistake again. I met with Sophia yesterday. She's a remarkable woman, and she deserves better than what you gave her too. In trying to keep us both, you lost us both. I hope that was worth preserving your comfort for a little while longer. I'm not writing this to hurt you, though I won't. Pretend I don't want you to feel the weight of what you've done. I'm writing this because I need you to know that I'm going to be fine. Better than fine, actually. You taught me what I won't accept in a relationship. You showed me the difference between love and possession, between comfort and passion, between a partner and a convenience. Those are valuable lessons, even if they came at a terrible price. I'm leaving this city next week. I don't know where I'm going yet, but I know I need to be somewhere that doesn't remind me of the woman I was when I believed your lies. I need to figure out who Emma Clark is when she's not trying to be the perfect girlfriend to a man who is living a double life. Don't try to contact me. Don't ask Sarah or my parents how I'm doing. Don't send flowers or apologies or explanations.
You've said enough.
And I've heard enough. The only thing I want from you now is your absence from my life. I hope you learn to be honest with Sophia, with your child, and most importantly, with yourself. Not for my sake, but because no one deserves to love someone who's only capable of loving in fractions. Goodbye. David, I genuinely hope you become a better man than you were with me. Emma. I sealed the letter in an envelope and walked to David's apartment building, sliding it under his door like a final period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. 2 weeks later, I was standing in the Portland International Airport with 2 suitcases and a one-way ticket to Barcelona. Sarah had tried to talk me out of it. Running away to Europe isn't going to solve anything, she'd said over drinks the night before I left. I'm not running away, I'd replied. I'm running towards something.
I just don't know what it is yet.
My sister Lisa had offered me her spare room in Portland. My parents had suggested I come home to Chicago for a while, but none of those options felt right. They all involved being surrounded by people who knew the old Emma, who would want to help me heal from what David had done. But I didn't want to heal from David. I wanted to become someone who never would have fallen for his lies in the first place. Barcelona felt like the right kind of unknown. I'd studied Spanish in college, but never had a chance to use it. I'd always wanted to see the Sagrada Familia, to walk through Park Güell, to learn what it felt like to live somewhere that art was integrated into daily life. More than that, it was where Sophia had grown up, where she was returning to start fresh with her baby. There was something poetic about choosing the same city she'd chosen for her new beginning. The flight was long and turbulent, but I didn't mind. The physical discomfort seemed appropriate somehow, like my body was processing the upheaval in my life. I watched movies I'd never seen, read a book about a woman who started over after losing everything, and tried not to think about the fact that this was the furthest I'd ever traveled alone. When the plane touched down in Barcelona, the late afternoon sun was streaming through the airport windows, painting everything golden. I collected my bags, exchanged money, and took a taxi into the city center, watching unfamiliar architecture roll past my window. I'd rented a small apartment in the Gothic Quarter through an online service, sight unseen. It was either brave or stupid, but I was past caring which. The apartment was tiny but perfect exposed brick walls, a narrow balcony overlooking a medieval street, morning light that streamed through tall windows. I set my suitcases down and opened the balcony doors, letting the sounds of the city wash over me. Spanish voices drifted up from the street below. Footsteps on ancient cobblestones, the distant sound of someone practicing guitar. Life happening in a language I barely understood in a place where no one knew my story. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe completely. That first week was a study in solitude. I explored the city on foot, getting lost in narrow alleys, and finding myself in sun-drenched plazas where old men played chess and children chased pigeons. I ate meals at tiny cafes where the waiters didn't speak English, and I had to point at menu items and hope for the best. I started taking Spanish lessons at a language school near the beach, surrounded by other expats and travelers who were all there for their own reasons. My teacher, Carmen, was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and paint-stained fingers who'd moved to Barcelona from Madrid to start over after her divorce. "You have sad eyes," she said to me after my first week of classes, but also determined eyes. That's a good combination for learning a new language and for starting a new life. I'd been in Barcelona for 3 weeks when I saw Sophia at the market in Boqueria. She was standing at a fruit stand, her pregnancy now more pronounced, speaking rapid Spanish with the vendor. She looked radiant in the way pregnant women sometimes do, her skin glowing with health and purpose. I could have walked away, pretended I hadn't seen her. But something made me approach instead. "Sophia?" She turned, and her face lit up with surprise. "Emma, what are you doing here?" "Starting over," I said simply. "You?" She laughed, placing a protective hand over her belly. "Same thing." Through the market together, and she introduced me to vendors she knew, translating names of fruits and vegetables I'd never tried. Her Spanish was fluid, musical, nothing like my halting classroom pronunciation. "How are you adjusting?" she asked, as we sat at a small cafe sharing a plate of Jamin and cheese. "It's hard," I admitted. "Everything is unfamiliar. I feel lost most of the time." "Lost can be good," Sophia said thoughtfully. "Lost means you have room to discover who you are when you're not trying to be who you think you should be." Over the following weeks, Sophia and I developed an unlikely friendship. She showed me hidden corners of the city, taught me to navigate the metro system, helped me practice my Spanish. In return, I helped her set up the nursery for the baby and listened when she needed to talk through her fears about becoming a single mother. "Do you think we're crazy?" I asked one evening as we watched the sunset from Park Gal. "Two women bonded by loving the same man who lied to both of us?" "Maybe," Sophia said, her hand resting on her growing belly. "But I think we're healing each other in ways we didn't expect. Sometimes the people who understand your pain best are the ones who shared the source of it." 6 months after arriving in Barcelona, I was walking along the beach at sunset when my phone rang. Sarah's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. Our weekly calls had become less frequent as my new life took shape, and I could tell she was worried about how far I drifted from everything familiar. "Hey," I said, settling onto the sand to watch the waves. "Emma, I have news." Sarah's voice was tight with barely contained excitement. "David called me." My stomach clenched reflexively, the way it always did when his name came up. What did he want? "To ask if I knew how to reach you. Apparently, he's been trying to find you for weeks." "I hope you told him no." "Of course I did. But Emma, he sounded different, broken maybe." I think losing both you and Sophia really destroyed him. I dug my toes into the cool sand, watching a couple walk hand in hand along the water's edge. Good, I said and meant it. Maybe now he'll understand what it feels like to have your life fall apart because of someone else's choices. There's something else, Sarah said carefully. I heard through mutual friends that he's been in therapy. Serious therapy, trying to figure out why he was so afraid of being honest with the people he loved.
That's great for him, really, but
it doesn't change anything for me. I know. I just thought you should know that he's trying to become a better person. After we hung up, I sat on the beach until the stars came out, thinking about the woman I'd been when I first learned David's name. She seemed like a stranger now, so eager to please, so willing to accept crumbs of attention and call it love. The Emma sitting on this Barcelona beach was different. She spoke 3 languages now, had friends from 6 different countries, and was planning to start graduate school in art history at the University of Barcelona in the fall. She had opinions about Catalonian politics, could navigate the city like a local, and had learned to be comfortable with her own company. Most importantly, she knew the difference between being loved and being convenient. 3 weeks later, Sophia gave birth to a beautiful daughter she named Isabella. I was at the hospital when she arrived, one of the first people to hold the baby who might have been my stepdaughter in another life. She's perfect, I whispered, looking down at Isabella's tiny face. She looks like David, Sophia said softly. She did. The same blue eyes, the same stubborn chin. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old pain, imagining the life that might have been if David had been honest from the beginning, but it passed quickly, replaced by something closer to gratitude. If David had been different, if he'd been honest, if he'd chosen me, if he'd never met Sophia, I would never have discovered who I could become on my own. David wants to visit, Sophia said as I handed Isabella back to her, to meet his daughter. Will you let him? Eventually. She deserves to know her father, even if he's flawed. Sophia looked up at me with tired but determined eyes. But I'll never let him hurt her the way he hurt us. No, I agreed. She deserves better. As I walked home through the winding streets of the Gothic Quarter, past cafes where I now knew the waiters by name and shops where the owners asked about my Spanish classes, I realized something had shifted inside me. I no longer thought about David every day. When I did think about him, it wasn't with the crushing grief that had consumed me in those first weeks, but with something closer to pity. He'd had 2 women who loved him completely, and he destroyed both relationships through fear and selfishness. That night, I sat on my small balcony with a glass of local wine and opened my laptop. I'd been thinking about writing, not just the marketing copy that had paid my bills in New York. I wanted to tell the story of a woman who discovered that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is also the thing that saves you from a life you never really wanted. I started typing. The silk dress hung against my bedroom door like a ghost of tomorrow's promises, ... As I wrote, I realized this wasn't just David's story or even my story. It was the story of every woman who'd ever settled for being loved conditionally, who'd ever made herself smaller to fit into someone else's vision of who she should be. It was a story about learning that sometimes you have to lose everything. You thought you wanted to discover what you actually need. The Mediterranean breeze carried the scent of jasmine through my open windows, and somewhere in the distance, someone was playing guitar again, the same melody I'd heard on my first night. In Barcelona, the city had become home in a way that felt both surprising and inevitable. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. For a moment, my heart stuttered, wondering if David had somehow found a way to reach me, but it was from Carmen, my Spanish teacher. Emma, I have a friend who runs a small art gallery. She's looking for someone bilingual to help with an exhibition about expat artists in Barcelona. Interested? I smiled and typed back, see, absolutamente, 6 months ago. I would have checked with someone else before making that decision, asked David what he thought, worried about whether it was practical, second-guessed my own judgment. Now, I just said yes to possibilities and trusted myself to figure out the details. As I got ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. My hair was longer now, sun-streaked from all those walks along the beach. My skin was golden from the Mediterranean sun, and there was something different in my eyes, a confidence that hadn't been there before. Looked like a woman who knew her own worth. In the morning, I would call the gallery owner. I would continue building this new life I'd stumbled into through heartbreak and necessity. I would keep learning Spanish, keep exploring hidden corners of the city, keep becoming someone I actually liked being around. But tonight, I was content. To sit with the knowledge that David's betrayal, devastating as it had been, had given me the greatest gift of all, the chance to discover who I was when I wasn't trying to be perfect for someone else. The woman looking back at me from the mirror was someone worth knowing, someone worth loving properly, and for the first time in my life, that was enough.